Welcome to the Trust Issues podcast. Today I have Emma Green on the show, and she is actually one of my dearest friends. We actually met at a mastermind that we both were a part of in 2023 and instantly clicked, instantly became best friends. And not only that, but she's freaking brilliant. She is one of the most brilliant businesswomen I have ever met. And her background is super interesting in that she's worked in corporate, but now she is a small business owner and co owns Your CEO Mentor with her co founder, her dad, Marty. And what they have built at Your CEO Mentor is a place where leaders would learn the things that they don't teach at business school. These are the things that your bosses won't teach you because they're unlikely to have developed as exceptional leaders themselves. They have a top rated podcast with over 5 million downloads. It's called the No Bullshit Leadership Podcast. And it's where you're told the hard truths and given the tried and true tested strategies to move through any difficult situation and drive performance in your business. While Marty is the face of the brand and he himself has run multi-billion-dollar companies, Emma is really at the helm of every business decision, and she is running this company in such an incredible way with so much detail. So in this episode, we talk a ton about not only podcasting, which is really interesting because of how they have carved themselves out in a very competitive, saturated market. Leadership podcasts, there's probably a million leadership podcasts out there. They are in the 0.05 top percent of leadership podcasts in the world. We get really nitty gritty on podcast strategy, what works to grow a podcast, what you should do if you're wanting to grow a podcast and start one today. But we also then talk about how the podcast plays into her entire funnel of their business and how that sends people to their courses and really the details that she looks at when it comes to them having a multi-million-dollar business. I love chatting with Emma because she goes granular and she's also super transparent. She shares things like how their small Instagram following really doesn't hinder their success, and it doesn't have to hinder your success if you're wanting to make a lot of money and help a lot of people online. So let's dive into this interview with my dear friend, Emma Green. Welcome, Emma, to the Trust Issues podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. I haven't done a podcast interview in ages. And when you asked me to do this, I was like, yes, I'm so excited to have this conversation.
And I feel so excited too, because it's like I just get to talk to one of my best friends. So we get to just chat, muck it up, and have some really juicy conversations though. Like I'm really excited for this. We're gonna get into the nitty-gritty, which is what you're so good at. And I think it's gonna be amazing.
Yeah, this is what goes down in the DMs, and we're just gonna pull it into IRL.
We're taking the group chat and we're going public. We're like, this is what we talk about anyways every single day. We're just gonna bring it to the show.
Yep. Everything full transparency. So let's go.
That's what I love about us. Okay, so first question for you. Why should people listen through to the end of this episode?
People should listen through because I'm going to lay out our entire funnel from our podcast, which has had over 5 million downloads, how that is a lead magnet for our online courses and digital products, which have made us millions, maybe $5 million over the last 5 years, I would say, from our digital courses, and really just, pull back the curtain and dig into how is this working for us and how are we consistently doing, 800K plus launches.
So good. And why should they listen to you when it comes to this? I know, but I want you to tell.
I think just because I've tested so many different things and I have worked out what really works for our business. I came from a marketing background, so I have that really robust marketing background in commercial, and then I've brought that into small business. My co-founder is my dad, and he is the former CEO of a multi-billion-dollar business. So I really bring a lot of corporate stuff into small business, and I'm able to make things fit for purpose. So what you hear from me is, yes, it's a mix of me learning from my own small business experience, but it also is backed by a lot of strategy and big business learning. So, molding those together, that is what has been such a fun part of our growth.
And I can attest to that. The day that I met you, the first conversation I heard you have like on our Zoom call, on our first mastermind call, I was like, damn, this girl is smart. Like, you brought such a different element to the group that wasn't there. And I was like, I want to be your friend. I mean, obviously, we're friends for so many other reasons, but you're freaking smart. So, okay, let's dive into podcasting because you
Yeah.
said, it's part of your funnel.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we are on a podcast right now. A lot of my listeners are entrepreneurial business owners. They want to diversify their marketing, their own traffic sources. You guys have nailed podcasting. Over 5 million downloads. And the podcast is called the No Bullshit Leadership Podcast. So for those of you who are listening, we're going to plug it in the show notes. You can go listen and follow. Obviously, you guys are killing it, but I want to ask a question that I have a lot of my followers ask: is it too late to start a podcast today and grow it to be successful? What do you think?
I don't think it's too late to start a podcast, but I do think it's too late to start a podcast with no clear direction. And we've spoken about this before, really thinking about anything that you bring into the podcast space. You got to think about it like it is any digital product that you put out there, not just a free lead magnet. A lot of people launch podcasts and run out of gas. They do 10, 15 episodes and then they go, well, I got nothing else to talk about. They don't kind of think about this as like a long-term commitment and medium. And so I think that it's not too late to start a podcast, but if you want to stand out and you want to be able to build an audience, you have to be really measured with what you're doing. You got to plan it out. It's not just a thing that you start one day and go, oh, I'm going to start a podcast. You have to really think about, why am I starting it? Who is my demographic? Who are my competitors? Like, what am I competing against? And then how can I carve out my own niche within this highly saturated market? Because there's I don't even know the stats, but over 3 million podcasts easily out there. Our podcast is in 0.5% of the top podcasts. So it takes a lot of planning and consistency and grit to get through that. But, we've been doing it for 5 years. So, there's that consistency in play.
And I think there was a stat that I heard that said something around less than 10% of podcasts like ever actually make it past their 50th episode.
Mm.
And I mean, like, so you think about how many podcasts are out there that are on the app that you can look at, but people don't make it. This is our 55th episode. So we're chugging along. We're chugging along. I'm excited for that. So talk to us about, okay, so if it's not too late and you have to do it well, what are some of the top things that people need to consider? I'm going to start a podcast. What do I need to bring to the table? Do I need to have a good name? Do I need to have a good niche? Do I need, like, what are the things? What's a little checklist of what people need to have a podcast that's worth listening to?
Great question. So I think the first place to start is to work out who you're making this podcast for. Are you making it for teachers? Are you making it for people who love health and wellness? Are you teaching it for designers? For us, leadership, there's 1,000 leadership podcasts out there, millions, probably 1 million of those 3 million are leadership podcasts. So we dove into a pretty saturated, I guess, piece of the podcast market. But think about, who are the people that you want to connect with and what do they need? Just because you think something might be interesting, that doesn't always relate to what other people are going to find interesting. So I would look around, like, what are the top podcasts doing? What do they have that is going really well? Like, listen to a lot of podcasts that are for your demographic of people, and then kind of try and go, like, what can I bring that is different? So I'll give you an example. For our podcast, most leadership podcasts are interview podcasts where they, interview other leaders, and in our segment, obviously interview other leaders. Marketing podcasts get marketers to go on and talk about marketing strategies. For our podcast, I wanted to do something completely different. I wanted it to be original content every single week, 15 minutes, short, sharp, really practical and implementable things. So bringing, we'd like to say, like, simple but powerful. And can we get that into 15 minutes so that people just get this short, sharp hit of leadership insight? And that was really different compared to the other leadership podcasts that were out there. And so just using that example, if you're looking at, okay, this is my demographic, this is what's really big out there, this is what's doing well, and then thinking about how can I come at it from a different angle, and even just like into the types of people that you're interviewing, maybe that's completely different or coming from a completely different angle. Otherwise, I think you just kind of, I don't know, it's just a bit same. If you really want to, hit it off from the mark, that's what I would say. The second thing is I would get a big bank of episodes before you start doing it, because often, like we spoke about in the intro, people will get kind of 10 episodes in and then life will get in the way. They don't see their listens going up significantly. They haven't been able to start putting those listeners into funnels or getting them off the airways because the listener doesn't trust them yet. They don't know them well enough. They're like, okay, cool, you've done 10 episodes. I'm happy to keep listening, but I'm not so involved that I'm going to give you my email address or that I'm going to like go into your socials or whatever. So they kind of get to that point, not that much happens, and then, other business things get in the way. So I would say the second thing is to get a big, if you can do 15 episodes before you even launch, that will help you to keep the momentum going. And then, launching 5 or so, I like to say 3 to 5 for your initial launch, so that people can have a little bit of a binge and get to know you a little bit more. And then maybe they'll press follow or subscribe. And from that point, you can start building on that. But I think those would be the key things. Really figure out who your demographic is, what are your competitors doing in that space, what can you do differently, and then make a bank of content so that when you do launch, it's not just a flash in the pan. It's like, okay, cool, these are coming out for the next 3 or 4 months. You've committed to that, and then you can keep, building on that bank and working out what people are liking and what you should make more of.
So good. We did half of those things right. We did the content bank in the beginning. We launched with several episodes so people could binge. And then life happened. And then we actually, which I will say, this is something that I knew I was always committed to the show, but what we did was we made a pivot just like in what the show was going to be about and our hosts of the show.
Yeah.
So that was a shift. But I think like 100%, if we had not banked all of that content ahead of time, just no way, especially being parents, like,
Yeah.
business owner stuff coming up, like you have to be prepared. So obviously you've said that you guys came into a pretty saturated niche, leadership being a huge niche. I listen to a lot of different leadership podcasts. I would love to know how you guys came into that space though and broke out and like created. Obviously you talked about that one specific thing that made your show different, but is there any other things that you guys did, whether it was marketing the show or anything else, that made you guys, I mean, obviously a top podcast in that niche?
Yeah, I think the consistency is a big one. So we've never missed a week. We have been going for, since September 2018. So I think that consistency has played a big part in what has got us to being listened to by a lot of people. I think the name No Bullshit Leadership, we created that because we wanted to filter out the people who were not for us. I think naming your podcast is really important. So there are 2 parts to this. The first part is making it SEOable. So I think there are a lot of podcast episodes or podcasts out there that are very ambiguous. They don't tell you what the podcast is about, and that makes it really hard for people to organically find you. So you want to think about, yes, something might sound cool, but if you're a marketing podcast, if you can have marketing in the name, I know it's naff, but like people will find you a lot easier when they're looking on the platforms, And then, the second part is like, how can you filter out people who are and who aren't for you? And that's what No Bullshit Leadership did for us. It really, like, as soon as people see it, they kind of go, oh, no bullshit leadership. That's what I want. I want leadership content that is no fluff, that's real world, that there's just no bullshit. I can just easily understand it and get in there and implement it. And so we draw in those people and we repel people who are not going to be aligned with our style and our leadership ethos. So there's a lot in a name, I think, and that's probably one of the things that helped us to attract the right people. Our Wall Street Journal best-selling book is called No Bullshit Leadership, and that has, that did the same thing. It really gets people to go, yeah, wait, that's me. I'm a no bullshit leader. Let's go, let's read that. That has then helped us, and I know we'll cover this in a little while, but that has helped us get the right audience listening for our products. Because once people are listening to the podcast and they really like that stuff, they're like, okay, what else do these guys do? And then that is what follows on to the online courses and the other stuff that we do.
Mm-hmm. It's like giving your listener an identity, it's like you're giving your entire community an identity. They can call themselves no bullshit leaders.
Yeah.
And that's so brilliant. That's so good. So obviously, your podcast is a huge part of your funnel, which I want to get to the nitty-gritty of that in a second. But before we get there, what are some things that maybe don't really work to grow a podcast? Because I'm sure you've tried a lot of different things. Like, what are some things that you were like, nah, that wasn't really worth the time or the energy to grow the show?
So I think podcasting is really difficult because you don't get clear stats. You don't understand what the churn is. You don't understand, how you can get stats on how many listens you've had that week, which episodes have been listened to, that kind of data. But you don't know who's listening, whether you've got returning listeners, whether they're new listeners. And so it is actually really difficult to know, did we just get more listens this week because the topic was like a really hot topic? Was it the email subject line? Was it the social video? There are so many pieces to the puzzle that are unknown, and you just have to be like prepared for that in creating a podcast. But some of the things that a couple of things that we've tried that I don't think have worked. And just to preface this is just, us and our team and the way we've done things. These things may work for other people, but they just haven't worked for us. So I would say running ads to our podcast. We've done this a couple of times, and running ads to the podcast to get listeners has been patchy. We've put like a decent amount of money into it, and we just don't see a noticeable uplift enough for us to keep putting money into it. What we do instead that works really well is we've got a personalized podcast quiz where people can go and do the quiz. They put their email in. Yeah, it goes off. I think I don't even know what the URL is, so people can test it. I think it's like
we'll put the link in the show notes.
Yeah, like just so they can see how it works. But they do the quiz. It basically, tells you what kind of podcast playlist you need. Like, are you a CEO who's burnt out? Are you a new leader who is lost and don't have any mentors? Are you a mid-level leader who is lacking motivation? There's all these different kind of answers that it comes out with. And then that podcast list will get emailed to you, and then it's a PDF, and it's got all the podcast episodes that we recommend for someone in your circumstance. And then that, obviously people are then going back and listening to, say, 10 episodes or whatever. And we found that has been really good in getting people to really narrow in on the we've got over 300 episodes. So like, what is going to actually make a difference for them? And then that's kind of what hooks them in. So ads to the podcast, doesn't work so well. Adds to the quiz that give them the podcast episodes, that works really, really well. And then there's a bunch of stuff we do off the back of that. So we send nurture sequences depending on, where someone's landed in the quiz, and we just give them more resources to kind of help them where they're at in their journey. So that's where I sit with ads. I think one of the most underrated advertising channels is on podcasts. So I think podcast advertising is so cheap for what you get. Like, we have advertisers on our podcast, and I'm just blown away at how little revenue it makes us for getting access to our community in their ears, a trusted source. So we've run some podcast advertising on other podcasts. And while I haven't seen a huge spikes, we definitely get like-minded leaders coming over from different complementary podcasts, and it's cheap. I think it's a really cheap way to get people from one podcast while they're in the podcast app to another. Going on other people's podcasts is very hit and miss. I think we don't pursue it as a strategy because there's so much time, energy, and effort that you need to kind of use to get on, to really personalize your pitch, get people to understand why you're the right person. You know, when you get to a certain level of podcasting, you kind of, it doesn't make as much sense to go on, you know, really small podcasts for the time that it takes to get everything. You know, it's just, there's no value equation there for me. Like for me to get Marty on a podcast or for me to go on a podcast, we'll only do it when, you know, that it comes to us and we're like, oh yeah, you know, this is a really good match for us and we'd love to have this conversation. Because I just don't see, unless it's a really big podcast. I know a lot of people say, you know, do podcast interviews with those people in your niche. And yes, you know, that might get you a couple of listens, but I just don't see it as like a long-term strategy that's worthwhile for me. Like I'd rather run ads to the podcast quiz and get people, spend my time and energy and money doing that versus trying to get on other people's podcasts. So that might be a little controversial because I know a lot of people do podcast tours, but
Yeah.
I just haven't seen it move the needle for us.
Yeah, that's like, top strategy in the industry, I think. Go do a podcast tour. I know someone who launched a book and went on like 300 podcasts or something. And that's a lot of work. It's a lot of time. That's a lot of time away, spent away from your business or, family in general. So
Yeah.
I love that. It's such a great workaround instead of basically wasting your time in a place that you may or may not benefit from. Why not just create your own podcast quiz? I'm putting that
And
on
you
my
can't,
list right now. So
yeah, you
good.
can't track that as well.
Yeah.
So we've been on decent sized podcasts and again, seen marginal uplift in listens. It could have just been that week's podcast topic on our podcast was really good. I can't, I just haven't seen like those huge spikes that you would want to see. And so I guess I probably want to normalize for people that don't expect to get on a podcast and then see a huge uplift. I think one thing that does work really, really well on when you go on other people's podcasts is if you've got something to sell. If you've got, if you go on a, let's say, health and wellness podcast and you've got a health and wellness product, and then, you put that link in the show notes or whatever, I do think that works really well. I've got a friend, Jess, she runs a company called Number Two. It's like post-poo drops, very niche, right?
Oh, yeah, yes, you've told me about this.
I've told you about her, yeah. And she will go on a podcast and talk about Number Two and she'll see that directly in her sales. Like she can see, okay, that works. But in terms of getting more listeners to your podcast, I'm not sold.
We love this strategy because, as you know, working on CPG brand, wellness CPG brand, I'm like taking notes from the podcast queen over here in the notebook. Okay, so obviously you talked about this podcast, your leadership podcast being a huge part of your funnel. Walk me through the funnel. Is the quiz the beginning of the funnel? What is the funnel? Because I'm assuming, and this is, correct me if I'm wrong, a huge question I get from my listeners is, if I start a podcast, can I really make money from my podcast? And I think, in my opinion, and we've talked about this before, a very small percentage of people are actually going to make money off of the ad spend, or what companies are willing to spend and pay you for you to talk about their product on your podcast. You have to have a specific type of podcast for that, and you have to have a really freaking big audience for that. So that isn't necessarily like our recommendation, correct me if I'm wrong, but what is the way that your podcast is a driver, obviously, to get people into your funnels and to increase your revenue?
There are a lot of funnels. You are right, though. The podcast, as I said earlier, the podcast ad revenue, I mean, it's probably 1% of our total revenue. Maybe it kind of depends on the campaigns that we choose to run. We say no to most advertisers, which our podcast hosts don't love, but we just want to make sure that the brands that we have on there are the right brands. But yes, the ad revenue, I think, so for full transparency, we have about 35,000 listens a week. We've got 2 podcast episodes that go out each week. Monday is not a monetized podcast episode because that is a 5-minute episode, and I just don't want ads running on a 5-minute episode. So the only one that's monetized is the Wednesday episode, which is like 15-20 minutes. Usually we just do like a pre-roll. I don't like 2 ads going in a row, so I say a pre-roll and a post-roll because I hate like 6 minutes of ads. You listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
But would I do 6 minutes of ads if I was making millions on ads or, a couple $100,000? Sure. You know what I mean? Like, I think once you get to that level, the advertising makes sense. For us at 35,000 listens a week with only, I don't know, maybe let's say 20,000 of those are monetized, it doesn't make sense for us. So how do I make money from the podcast? Our online program, Leadership Beyond the Theory, it's an 8-week online leadership program. That has been our bread and butter. So that is the thing that really, I guess, we started the business with that online product, and that is still a thing today. That is our biggest revenue generator, especially in terms of profit margins. So because we're a very lean team, it doesn't take us much to run it anymore. We run it in live version and evergreen. That is like, that's where, that's how we make millions essentially, because there's only one Marty that can go out and do keynotes and workshops and stuff like that. And so that's not where we want to focus. Even though he loves doing that stuff, the key focus is on Leadership Beyond the Theory, and we've got a new product coming out in a couple of months called Strategy Beyond the Theory. So that's kind of the next
That's
iteration.
good.
Yes, I know. It's all about like strategy as a business owner, as a CEO, as a senior leader. Like, how can you learn business strategy in a really, really simple way? But let's finish this bit first. So in terms of the funnels, pretty much I would say 90% of people who do Leadership Beyond the Theory find us through the podcast, or have listened to the podcast, or have been referred to the podcast by someone. And so you think about those stats, and it's like, regardless of all the other things that we have going on, the podcast is like the cornerstone of it all, because people listen to the podcast, they go, oh yeah, we like this, what's the next thing that we can do? And then obviously they'll find their way into one of our funnels, which will be the podcast quiz. It might be the free leadership masterclass. It might be the Crush Your Career Challenge. It might be the leadership audit. Like, we literally have hundreds of freebies.
It's amazing.
When we first started the podcast,
I just have to pause there for a second. Like, you said, hundreds of freebies, because I think that like people think, I just think with social media and the way that people portray business, and I just, I put something up and, I just want to acknowledge that for a moment, because I think that's true business. That's you guys truly giving value. And that's why you have the business that you have. That's why you have $5 million downloads. That's why you have a loyal following. That's why you have all these no bullshit leaders who are, like chanting and behind you all, and, obsessed with everything you put out, because you put the value out in exchange for what you're getting in return. So I just want to acknowledge that. Like, if you're listening, pay attention to that, because that is a point that you need to like understand, that to have a successful business, like, what are you giving of value to your audience? Like, you guys are just, it's so good. Okay. Well, back to what you were saying.
I just think I obviously agree with everything you've just said then. And but the thing is, we have been going for, we've been bringing out free content for 5 years straight plus. Like, this is our 6th year now. And from our very first podcast episode, we would offer the very first podcast episode is called Respect Before Popularity. And the freebie that goes with that is the daily reflection questions. And so from like day one, we had freebies that would get people onto our email list. And then that's kind of, obviously we email our list every single week with the new podcast episode and anything else interesting that's going on. So if you think about like all those episodes, everything we've learned, we don't do a freebie for every single one. And that freebie could be reflection questions. It could be a summary. It could be like extra things that Marty talks about in the episode. But whatever it is, we're like, how can we, as you said, give value and go, take it that next step further than just the podcast episode, and B, how can we get that person's email address so that they can get into our funnel so that we can help them. Like that's what it is at the end of the day. Our purpose is to improve the quality of leaders globally. And everything we do comes back to that. So whether people just listen to our podcast, download the freebies, become better at leadership through that, never buy anything from us, we don't care. Because there's enough people in the world that actually do want, they want the framework. They want to, work with Marty in, a more direct capacity. Like there are a percentage of those people. But most people who listen to the podcast they're just going to listen to the podcast, get the freebies, whatever. And that's totally fine. We don't care either way. It's important to know, like, you don't just have to go on, you don't have to make hundreds of freebies. It's just like something that's happened over time because our eye has been on that purpose,
since day one.
Yeah. Like if we were trying to improve the quality of leaders globally, would we add a PDF resource to accompany this podcast episode? Actually, no, it's not going to add anything to the podcast episode, so we won't. Oh, actually, yes, we think it will if we can give them these couple of extra steps. So everything goes through that lens. So, the where someone gets into our business depends on like where they are. Yes, the podcast is one place, but they might be searching up, leadership masterclass, and then we might come up on Google, or they might be, watch one of our videos on social media and get served an ad for the leadership audit, the personal leadership audit, or, whatever, like the quiz, the personalized podcast quiz. So there's so many different ways to get in. And then we have nurture sequences, email sequences off the back of that just give even more value. So we're really value, 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 value. If all you do is take the value, that's cool. But also we have more products if you want to get even more value than what we can put into the freebies. Does that answer the question? I feel like I went on a tangent there, but I was just kind of trying to explain like how that whole funnel process works.
No, it's brilliant. It absolutely answers the question. And I think what it does is it really paints the picture of, okay, if I want to create a podcast and if that's going to be a part of my business, you just linked podcast to business, podcast to digital products, podcast to courses, which now brings me into our next conversation, which is about the courses you guys have launched and the success you've seen with them. I think that right now everybody wants to launch a course and everyone is launching a course, whether it's successful or not. You guys have done this really well. You've had some huge launches recently that I'd love to dive into. So can you share a little bit of your marketing strategy? Is there anything in addition to the podcast that you do to then lead? Because I don't know what the stat was. I think you said 80 to 90% of the people who join Leadership Beyond the Theory, which is your core course, listens to the podcast. Yeah. So is there anything else in addition or anything else that you're doing that you would suggest for the listener to do to promote their course? What are the things that you guys are doing that's making your launches so successful?
Yeah, so our ecosystem has got more complex as we've done more and more launches. So I think we've done 10 live launches of Leadership Beyond the Theory. The first time I launched it, we did $30,000. So you can see like over time, you just kind of get better and better and better at let's try this or let's try that. And, it snowballs into, what you end up with. So I'm a big fan of like keeping it simple to start with. But a couple of the key things for us, email. Always email. We make the most sales on email, which is why we're so heavily, we lean so much on, those freebies and stuff, because that gives us people's email addresses and then we can help them to make an educated decision about something that we know will, make a huge difference to their lives. So you hear it all the time, having a really strong email list of the right people. It doesn't need to be a huge list. It just needs to be an email list of the right people who are your target demographic. That's really important. And spending the time in crafting those emails so that they make sense and that they help people get through any barriers or any questions. You just think about if you sent emails out to, tens of thousands of people, and they're never going to get on a call with you. You don't have time to do tens of thousands of discovery calls. So you have to be giving them the information that's simple but engaging. And I think there's a lot to be said for email copywriting. Until very recently, we did it all ourselves. Very recently, 3 months ago, we hired a copywriter, and he's only really just starting to understand how to write in our brand voice and everything now. But I think in 6 months' time, it'll be a really good for us because we do write so much email copy. So the email list is the main thing. Now, I'll give you some context. For an 800K launch, our email list is roughly 25,000 people.
And what's the product? And the product, how much is the product?
The product is, let me see, US, about 1,800 US.
1,800. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
2,750 Australian. I'm wait, trying to do the conversions in my head. So
you're a pro at this point.
I'm trying. It's with time zones. Whenever I text you, I'm is she asleep or?
Same. I have my Time Buddy app. I'm what time is it, Emma? I'm are you okay? Is it 1 a.m.? Are you texting me at 1 a.m.?
That was me last night. I literally texted you at 1 a.m. You're Emma, why are you on my phone? Yeah, email is number one for us. We also, in a year, we run about $200,000 in paid ads. And the biggest thing that we learned over time was it's not the ads that you spend during the launch, it's the ads that you do in the 6 months prior to the launch. So we're collecting leads hard for the 5 months before the launch. No, maybe 4 to 5 months, I'd say. So after a launch finishes, we kind of go quiet for a month, and then we get back into lead gen essentially and go, okay, let's go hard on ads. So I'd say, we spend about $100,000 on ads in each 6 month period. It fluctuates up and down depending on, if there's a new product or whatever, but let's just say roughly. And then I would say maybe $70,000 or $80,000 of that is spent on just lead gen and, getting them into our cycle so that they learn more about us and yada, yada. Then we put a portion of that to retargeting for the actual launch. So we're not spending as much during that launch. We don't lean on ads to kind of try and get us the launch numbers because it's part of our whole ecosystem. Someone might have listened to the podcast and then they click on an ad and then they convert, and that's great. I wouldn't say, oh, okay, well, ads are getting me that, because then they'll do the onboarding survey and they're I've been listening to your podcast for 5 years. Yeah, so there's the ad component, there's organic social, which is neither here nor there for us. Yes, our super fans are on social, but we've spoken about this a million times, and our social's pretty lame. Where I think we have about 8,000 followers on Instagram. We do well on LinkedIn.
I was gonna say LinkedIn is your jam. That's a whole nother world for me. But apparently right now LinkedIn is super hot. So you guys are ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I just want ManyChat to be able to work on LinkedIn, and then that would be amazing for us.
That would change your life.
Yeah.
But I love that because you know what? I think everybody who is we're crushing it with these big launches and we sold, however many millions, obviously they have a huge audience. They have 1 million Instagram followers. And you're damn, I'll never do that. And you guys are over here chilling with 8,000-9,000 Instagram followers, and you're creating a huge ripple effect, obviously, in the leadership world. So, which is hey, maybe Instagram isn't everything, isn't the end all be all. So if you're listening and you're I can't be successful because my Instagram sucks. Well, maybe that's not your way. That's not your path. Right. Yeah. There's so many other ways to generate traffic and to
You
grow
got
a
to remember,
list.
like,
So
my co-founder, like, my dad is a 60-year-old white guy. Like, he
yeah,
does not index well on Instagram. It's very difficult to get him to, appeal to the Instagram audience. And like, yes, we do fun stuff, and like, yes, I think we make really good content. We bat above our weight in terms of other leadership stuff that's out there, but it's not where the majority of our people are. The majority of people that care about what we're talking about are on LinkedIn, or they're in our email list, or they're listening to our podcast. And so,
yeah,
that's kind of really where we focus. Then in terms of the launches, like, as I said, we have a really lean team. So there's 4 of us full time, and usually during a launch, like, we'll have like, our graphic designer is only part-time, and that's kind of it during a launch. We also don't do any affiliate marketing, so every
that's
dollar that
so
comes
crazy.
in is like straight profit, I guess you could say. Like, we're not cutting it up with anyone. So it's a small team, but we really focus during the launches on personalized interactions. So, we look at people who have clicked the enroll link a couple of times, and, the customer success lead, Twyla or Tash, will reach out to them and say, hey, is there anything we can help you with LBT? Like, maybe they'll have a lot of the time they're just like, can I go on a payment plan, or when does it start, or whatever. And then they just needed that little bit of personal touch to get them across the line. And then so often they'll do their post program survey, and they'll say, oh, I just didn't think I'd have the time to do it, but now I'm just so glad that I took the leap because I've saved time. And, all these things that you can kind of see in the front end often get resolved in the back end. And I don't know if I've said this already, but we have it's at 87 at the moment, 87% completion rate for the program. And I really put that down to, like, the personalized touch. I think a lot of people think that personalized touch isn't scalable, and that it's not the kind of thing that you should be putting time into. But, even when we were, a decent size, I was still doing, and I still do occasionally as well, like, personalized videos to people who join our list, or who, jump on the wait list or whatever. People in the team do that now more than me. But yeah, I think, like, that personalized touch is so underrated. That's one of the big pieces of, getting these launches, and making sure that the right people are in the course. Because, our, like, the last cohort we ran, we didn't get one refund. I think our refund rate, and we have a money back guarantee at any point in time. You can, if you didn't get value, you can refund. There's nothing, like, no questions asked. And I think it really does come down to, like, that personal touch at the end of the day, but also being able to scale that. So I'm probably just rambling here, but I just think there's,
No,
there's a
it's
couple of
so
those key
good.
things that actually get us to that mark. It's not all about automation. It's not all about ads. It's not all about organic social. It's kind of everything together. And then we top it off with that personalized piece. And we know over time what emails work better. And, we've really, honed down that stuff to make sure that that's really tight. But yeah, the launches are, like, holistic. There's so many pieces to the puzzle, and it's just like adding a new piece each time to each launch, and tweaking and tweaking and tweaking until you kind of get to a point where you're happy.
If you could go back and redo your first launch, knowing what you know today, what would you do differently? Obviously, given the capacity, the team size, like, right? Because I'm thinking about the listener, I'm
Yeah.
thinking about they're new, they're thinking, I want to launch my own course, but I don't have copywriters, I don't have giant email list, I don't have, LinkedIn presence, whatever, fill in the blank, right? Whatever excuse can come up, fill it in. What would you do differently, or what would you add? What was another element that you would add? I personally just want to, like, put a little note in like a sticky note, and which I'm writing on a sticky note, so that's why I'm saying that, is I love what you said about personalization. Like even just the idea of sending a personalized video to people on your wait list for your program. Those little things, like 99% of people are not doing. They are saying, if you didn't get into my funnel, if you didn't buy my product from the link that was in the email, well, then see you later. And you're saying, no, there's so many other little things that you can do that you can add on to, of course, what like mainstream is saying. Have your ManyChat set up, post your reels every day, like the things I do, right?
Yeah.
So I learned so much from you in this way because you really take like things to the next level in detail. And I just sometimes I don't think that way. I don't have a super detailed brain when it comes to my own business. I'm like, duh, Erica, like that's a great idea. Freaking send a loom out to the waitlist people. Like put it on the list,
that
right?
still happens to me though. There's still many times where I'm like, why did I not think of that? Come on.
It's a lot of things happening all at once, besides motherhood,
Yeah.
marriage,
Yeah.
life, all the things. So just to go back to my question. So if you were to go back to that 30K launch, which I think is still pretty badass, what would you add on or what would you have done differently for the listener who is new to course launching?
Okay. I would double down on whatever it is that I'm already good at. So for you, that would be Instagram. For me, that would be the podcast. I would just really like maximize the thing that I'm already really good at and that I enjoy doing. And I would send more emails because I don't think people understand how few emails actually get read. And they go, oh, that, like I'm sending too many emails for a launch. And I'm like, if you feel like you're sending too many emails for a launch, send another one. You know, like really and especially I think I hear people when launches aren't going the way they want them to go and they kind of like start, doubting and backing down. It's like, no, just keep going, keep letting it play out. And the people who are your people, yeah, they might be like, oh, this is annoying, I'm getting 100 emails, but they're not going to unsubscribe because they know that you're giving so much value, between sales periods or whatever. You're not just like constantly selling all the time. Well, that's a tip. Don't constantly sell all the time. Yeah, I just think, the unsubscribes that we get from those people are never going to, continue their journey with us anyway. And they might join back again later. They might continue listening to the podcast, whatever. But I would send more emails and I would just spend a lot more time on talking to the person. And I mean, you can do so much with ChatGPT now. Like I didn't have this when I'd probably go back and use ChatGPT to dig a little bit deeper into my person's fears and barriers and like all that stuff. And then obviously, write them myself, but, get inspiration from that. If you're not a copywriter, like ChatGPT is there to be your copywriter. And, you can just pop stuff in there. If something's not working, you can go, can you reword this to sound, more friendly or whatever the case may be, use that resource. But yeah, I would double down on what I'm really good at. I would send more emails and I would make time to do the personalized stuff. So I would be reaching out to people. We don't try and sell people on the program. We try and work out if they're a good fit for it. And that's probably the difference. Like we're not going like, yeah, this is why you should buy it. We ask a lot of questions about where they're at, what they're being challenged with, how much time they feel like they can give to this. I'm always like, don't join if you can't give it your all, because you'll just end up at the end of the day like spending the money and just feeling crap about yourself because you haven't completed what you wanted to complete or whatever. So really those personalized videos and those personalized emails, for us, they're really just about working out like, is this a good fit for you and where you're currently at on your leadership journey? And doubling down on that personalization element, I think that is a no regrets move for anyone, and it doesn't cost anything except for your time.
And it's going to get you closer to your customer, which will teach you so much. It's like, that is a no freaking brainer. Talk to your people. If you don't know, ask, and they will tell you. Yeah. If you're like, why isn't none of this working? Ask your people. And then they can be like, well.
And if they don't buy, or if like we always send a like, why didn't you join email, so that we can get an understanding of like, what was it that didn't make you join? And, only a small percentage of those people are going to actually fill it out.
Respond, right.
But you might just, you might find something out about the way you launched, or maybe you didn't, maybe you didn't explain an element very well, and that's something that you can work on for the next one. So I would always do that as well, to kind of get that extra information from those people. If you don't ask, like, I remember there was we launched something, or maybe it was a freebie, I can't remember what it was. And I said to Tash, it's been out there for like 2 weeks and I haven't had anyone email me to tell me how it is. And she goes, Tash is my marketing manager. She goes, did you ask for feedback? And I was like, no, I just assumed that people would love it so much they would email me. And we started laughing. And then now every single time we're like, okay, we want to know how something is. Ask for feedback. Don't just assume that people are going to, write in with love letters about your product. You have to give them the opportunity.
Dude, such a golden nugget. That's what I love about you and how much I learn from you, is like these little tiny things make such a huge difference. I always talk about one of the mentors that I worked with for many years talks about 2 millimeter shifts. And sometimes it's just a 2 millimeter shift that can be the unlocking for your next income bracket, like the next million. It could be whatever you're aiming for. And that's just a tiny shift. That's just asking for the feedback. It's just sending a little personalized loom or something. Those little things could be the next breakthrough. So so good. Okay. So as we wrap this up, my last question for you is for our listener, where can they, if they're like, I want to start learning from you and from Marty, where can they connect with you guys? Where can they find the podcast? Where should they start? Give me the tea on that.
Yes. So if you are a leader or interested in leadership, go listen to our podcast, No Bullshit Leadership. You can find it in any podcast player. Just start there. Listen to a couple of episodes, cherry pick the topics that sound most useful to you, and then see if it aligns. And, you can take some of our, funnels and bits and pieces to kind of see what we do from a marketing standpoint, if you're interested in that. And then, on Instagram, we are at Your CEO Mentor, and you can always connect with me on LinkedIn. So I am there every single day. So just Emma Green.
Last question, actual last question. You have worked with hundreds of leaders. What is your number one leadership tip based on how many people you've worked with, how many people you've supported, the problems you've helped them solve? What's your number one leadership tip that you have?
Always be open to learning new ways of doing things. It doesn't matter what level you're at, whether you're a brand new leader or the CEO of Walmart. There are always things to be learned. And, we like to say that our no bullshit leaders are learning leaders. They're people who are open to trying new things, implementing new things, getting uncomfortable with having conversations in a different way than what feels natural. I think a lot of us lean on what feels comfortable, what feels natural, and we go, oh, well, this is the way I do it. This is, my leadership style, is my leadership fingerprint. But really being open to change and open to listening to other perspectives, trying things, taking things on and going, oh, well, that didn't work, but, I'll try this differently next time. I think that is what I see the biggest success factor being in leaders, is just being open to learning and trying new things, and having that, I guess, humility to be able to not hold on so tightly to the things that feel comfortable and the things that you think but just be more relaxed about potentially being able to do things in a better or a different way that gets the results that you want for the company and for the people that you're working with.
So good. I couldn't agree more. Emma, thank you for, number one, being my friend. And number two,
being my friend. Don't make me go all gushy on you. I love you. I miss being over there on the other side of the world. It sucks.
I know. I'm like, we're not okay thinking about the fact that we don't have our next reunion planned. So I'm not okay about it, but we're not going to talk about that.
You guys are coming to Australia. That's the next. We will. That's the next thing. Family trip to Australia. It'll only cost you, $50,000 in flights.
They're going to write a Netflix movie just about our trip to
Yeah,
Australia. All of
I
us are all
know.
coming over. Next thing you know,
Exactly.
we're on Netflix with our
Yeah.
story. No, but seriously, thank you for being so brilliant and being willing to get on here despite all the things you have on your plate and the things that you are constantly spinning, all the plates you're spinning, being willing to share with our audience. You are brilliant and I'm grateful for you.
I hope I added some value, and I loved being
So
on.
much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Trust Issues Podcast. If you enjoyed my conversation with Emma, make sure that you subscribe from wherever you're listening so that you never miss a single episode. I'll see you next time.